Have you ever thought about retail, specifically online retail? Well, today I'm going to meet two pioneers who've grown a business from a standing start to a £20 million turnover selling rugs. Hello and welcome to Trading Up. I'm Jim Fitzpatrick. This is the business podcast from the Irish News, produced in association with EY. And remember, you can get in touch at any stage by contacting us on email at tradinguppodcast@gmail.com. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul and Claire Vallely from Kukoon. Now, guys, I mentioned there that this is a business that's grown from nothing to a £20 million turnover selling rugs online. And you're based in Uri. So, Claire, first of all, brother and sister working together in business. How does that go?
It's interesting, so it is. But yeah, we've been working together for 20 years. And indeed, we worked together a lot of the years before that as well. I think we shared a couple of part-time jobs and in a few local shops. So I don't think we've known anything different. You know, children have done the markets together with our dad, and then I was 19, Paul was in his early 20s when we started the business. So thankfully we don't know an alternative view. I would say I feel very lucky to work with Paul. Like it has its challenges, and I think we would both agree on that. We're both very different people, very different opinions and views on things and how to do things, but we work towards the same goal. We always have done, and over the years, we've learned how to navigate the issues that have come up, and probably we've grown stronger at our ability to do that. Again, if it's something I'd recommend, I think it very much depends on the people involved. You have to really want to work together and really want a business to be a success. And if that's the case, then it's great. And over the years, I've got to know a lot of other business owners who are doing it alone or maybe doing it with non-family members, and personally, I think that's harder. I think it's a more lonely road and maybe some more risks with it as well. That, you know, any challenges we've faced, thankfully, we've been able to overcome them and make a go of it.
Let's talk about the early days. I want to ask a little bit about selling in the market, but first of all, let's just talk about this is essentially an online business, although you do have two retail, actual physical outlets, one in Belfast, one in Uri. But in terms of the main focus of the business, I mean, proportionally, it's mostly online, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, so I think the business is about 96% online. And then, as you said, with two retail stores, and online is a variety. We sell on, I think, 12 different channels. 12
different channels, okay, but it all began with eBay, isn't that right?
Started with eBay, sold our first rug on eBay in November 2006, so it's coming up on our 20-year anniversary this year. Then we actually got, it tells you early the days where we got invited on to Amazon. Amazon were building out their category, their homewares category, and they wanted other sellers, so we jumped on that, and then we built our first website, and I think we're under maybe our fifth or sixth website now, and then we've added on some other sites since, the likes of Debenhams and B&Q and channels like this that are really looking to expand their homewares range, and we're an ideal fit for them.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about channels, I think that's interesting for people that maybe haven't really considered, you know, online retail in depth. There's a range of channels now. You know, it's not just Amazon, or it's not just selling from your own website. You can work with other partners now who are creating these different marketplaces. So maybe you'll explore a little bit about that as well. But let's just go back to the kind of early days then. eBay, you had some rugs, presumably you decided this is what we're going to focus on. We're going to try and sell them. What were the challenges, and what was it like getting your first sale?
Yeah, so there was definitely no master plan from us. Our dad sold rugs at local markets, and we were selling all the things online, ornaments and things we bought at boot sales, that kind of thing. And it was our dad actually said, "There's some rugs I can't sell. I just don't have a customer for them. So if you can sell them, you don't have to pay me until after." We started listing them online and found that there was a little bit of interest. And I can actually remember a really Irish story. We were coming back from a funeral, and we got an email to say we'd sold our first rug. It was £32 and plus £4 shipping on eBay, and we were very excited. We knew that the cost price of this rug was quite reasonable, and there was a bit of margin there. And even though it wasn't, I think it took maybe a week for it to sell, we kind of got that jitter of excitement saying, right, this is a product we can buy more of, the margin's good, and we can make more listings and start to build the business from there. So yeah, a lot of engagement, a lot of buzz.
Do you remember what it was like trying to build that from that one? Well, right, great, okay, we've proven that you can actually sell something here, but you know, how do you actually turn that into a business and turn it from one to presumably something which is actually going to start paying a few bills?
Yeah, we learned that lesson early on. As Paul said, we had been selling stuff that we maybe were buying in boot sales or stuff from around the house in the early days, and if you can remember back 20 years ago, online was still in its infancy, so people were just getting comfortable with buying stuff online, and it was still novel for most people. And there was a lot of work involved. You have to photograph it, you have to list it, you know. And we realised quite quickly we were not going to be able to scale this. It wasn't going to provide a livelihood for both of us in that kind of model. So we knew we needed a product that we would be able to continue to buy and buy at a reasonable cost price, because obviously online people were more driven by value. So I think in those early days, it took us probably a few months to really get to grips with that. And then the issue became, well, what? And that's where the rugs, thankfully, we didn't believe at the start really that people would buy them online. A very tactile product, something people like to touch and to feel and to see the colours in person. And that's still a bit true today. 20 years ago, that was certainly the case. So we were very dubious at the start. Once we got that first inkling that no, there's a market here, like people are wanting to buy this online, but probably in a lot of cases people who didn't have the choice locally, you know, or something, they were looking something very particular. We then just set about trying to find a regular supply source for it, and that journey was interesting as well. It took us a few years to try and get to grips with that.
Tell us about that then. So you're trying to find, you've got an idea that people want to buy this stuff. They can buy it online. You know, you've proven that they don't need necessarily to go in, as you say, it's a tactile product, but they don't necessarily need to go in and touch and feel it. If they see it and it looks good and they're willing to give you a go and trust you, then they'll buy it. So, but your issue then is finding suppliers or a supplier that can get you stuff at a reasonable price that you can turn around and make a profit on. So tell us about that journey of finding, you know, the quality and the right sort of rugs and where you went to get that.
I think, yeah, like the good thing is must do is a good master, and the good thing about online is it's very price sensitive. There's a lot of customers, but there's a lot of competition. We realised early that buying from local distributors, there just wasn't enough margin in it. So it forced our hand to go direct to the factories, and that was probably something we would never would have considered, but we could see where the journey was going. So we traded, I think our second year, we done maybe 250,000 of turnover, and the profit was quite good, but only because we were working out of a shed sort of beside our parents' house, and we kind of realised if we wanted to scale this up and introduce proper costs into the business, the margin wasn't going to work. So we got, and it sounds so callow now, but we literally went online, typed in factories in Belgium, which was the rug making capital of Europe at the time, and we literally hopped in the plane and went door to door. We had no business card, we had no business plan, we had no thought of what we could sell. Some of the places we went to didn't even make rugs. They made the machinery for making rugs. This was almost early, very, very early Google days. You couldn't quite get the information you needed. So we kind of went door to door. Eventually, after maybe 2 or 3 days, found a couple of factories that would sell to people like us that arrived on their doorstep, and we bought clearance ranges and started to build up a bit of volume from there. And I think that we probably, over half of what we bought back then would have been considered really poor buys. It either wasn't the right product, or maybe it wasn't the right price, wasn't the right mix for our market. But the half that did worked really, really well, and we really just dug deep and kept going into that area and realised that when you get it right, the model stacks up, the finances stack up, and the opportunity to have something unique in the market that customers really want is gives you an exciting opportunity.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, what you're doing then is taking that big jump to go direct, and presumably then you're having to order more than you might otherwise have had to order. So what sort of scale were you jumping to then from, you know, just buying from local suppliers when you needed it?
I think that was the very scary part of that transition. Is we had been used, I think you had an old red Almera car and literally driving to local distributors here and packing it full of rugs, but there would have been ones and twos. So if, as Paul said, if it was a wrong buy, it wasn't the end of the world. You weren't invested too much into it. But when we were going direct to the factories, you were dealing with minimum order quantities, MOQs, and you would have been talking in that case sort of minimum of 50, in some cases hundreds. So getting the product wrong, you know, did have a lot more serious consequences.
What are we talking, in terms of costs, then you're talking
probably
many thousands? Yeah,
probably 25 to 30,000 for a container at that stage. And I can actually vividly recall that we had to take we gathered up a little bit of cash, but not enough to buy that first container. And I actually took a car loan out from Liverpool, Victoria for 15 grand. And that was the first sort of lump sum to buy the first container. And that kind of got us going. And once we bought the first container and sold enough of it, the margin was quite good. The gross margins at that stage were already probably in the 70s, which is quite strong. And if you sold half the container at a reasonable price, that'd give you enough to go and buy the next container. And as I said, our cost base was low at that stage. First 2 years, cost base was very low, so you could reinvest a lot of what you brought into the next containers. But yeah, that first 15 grand loan was definitely a scary moment. And then we probably at that stage you could have your credit cards with 0% transfers and things like that, and we started to get creative with using credit cards during our peak season, and we lived hand to mouth, I would say, for the first 5 years. Using every avenue of credit we could find just to kind of build it and get it going.
You're smiling there, Claire. So obviously, I think there's a sense, I can see the memories there. What are you thinking of?
Yeah, it's like obviously a business like that now just wouldn't work in a lot of cases. But that's, I think, the reality of an awful lot of businesses that set up in those early years. And I remember back to, there was a particular bank manager in our local bank, and she took a bit of a punt on us probably a few years in. And, we were told in later years about her colleagues were sort of like, you're mad, like they're so young and this is an online retail business. Like, who's doing that? It's always been an advantage, a plus for us to be sort of pioneering, to be early adopters, but it definitely has challenges, and there's plenty of stories around creativity and ways that we got things done, that maybe just wouldn't fly today. But I think there's different versions of them in today's world, really, for how people get businesses up and going. And I was grateful along the line for a couple of people who did back us probably and thought, right, it's a bit out there, but they seem to be dedicated to it. And yeah, it's just nice memories actually, but I'm glad it worked.
Absolutely. So tell us about the name then, Kukoon, where that came from, and what kind of forced you down that road of creating this brand and what that means to your success today.
So when we started, we were called the Rug House. So there wasn't an awful lot of imagination went into it. I think we knew the business needed a name, and it was pretty much does what it says on the tin. We were that then from 2006 to 2017, I believe. And the name was fine, but people couldn't remember it. And that became really apparent. We weren't driven to change it really for any other reason. And people were stumbling over the name. Like even our own family would be like, oh, it's the rug store company, the rug house, something rug anyway.
So it seems like an obvious name, but yeah, maybe it just allows for too many variations, does it?
Well, it actually has a term, as we've since learned, it's called slippage in the industry. So where it became a problem was we started to get returns from other companies. So in the UK and Ireland, there was several other companies with similar names. There was the Rug Warehouse, the Rug Storehouse, there was Rug House. They were getting our rugs, we were getting their rugs. And I can actually remember us having the conversation where we sat down and said, like, this is a technical problem, but there's a bigger problem here in terms of how is a customer going to remember who they bought from? Like, we understood by that point in the journey that we didn't want to just be a trading company. It wasn't just about making a profit. We wanted to build a brand. We wanted to build something that could exist beyond us. That just isn't possible with such a straightforward name when so many other people have a similar name. So we didn't have an alternative. There wasn't another name jumping out at us. We actually went to a branding company and just went through the process of who we are as a brand, and came up with quite a few different choices and ruminated over it for a while, and we stress tested it. I think we were originally Kukoon, Kukoon. So in our dialect said pretty much the same, but we put it out to a few. We were selling quite a bit internationally at the time to French and Portuguese and Spanish speakers, and we were told that the literal translation of that would be shithoon. Because the word cac in Spanish and Portuguese literally means shit. So while there may not be a
not
word,
a great branding term, no.
Not really the vibe we were going for a rug company. So went through a few sort of rounds of that and settled on it. And it's not straightforward. A lot of people, it's now so many people know it, it doesn't feel like an issue. But certainly at the start, people are like, what is this? What is this word? What is this meant to be? And we spent a bit of time explaining it. But I would stand by the decision in terms of you're better having a name that people can at least identify, hopefully eventually remember and make sense to them, than a name that makes sense, but they can't remember it or it doesn't stand out from competitors. So it was a learning, it was a headache to change it. It was certainly, I don't think we'd change it again, but it was well worth it. If we were starting a business again, we would know from day one not to make that mistake.
Yeah, I mean, and what the brand name says, among other things, is just it could be anywhere in a sense. It doesn't say, the Newry rug company. And was that important that it has a potential? You were talking about international customers there, that this was a name that maybe spoke internationally, that didn't identify with a particular locality. It was more identified with what you sold, the rugs.
Yeah, for sure. Like we had, when we were looking for a name, we were looking for something that evoked some sort of warmth or comfort. We're a homewares business, and we felt that cocooning or cocoon give people that, but also it had to be unique. It had to be easy to spell. As you said, very much not local or even national, but international. And also the .com domain available was another part of the list we looked at to see. And we have the .com domain. So yeah, we looked at all those factors, and Kukoon was the strongest name we found that kind of matched what we were looking to do. It probably takes a little bit of work or a little bit of better marketing and branding from us to evoke that warmth that we want customers to connect with. But in terms of it basic as a core brand name, we think it works.
So I want to talk about the different marketplaces and the channels or platforms that you're selling through. And I mean, I heard somebody criticize the way the economy works these days. It's actually Yanis Varoufakis, the former Greek finance minister. I don't know if you've seen his analysis of where we're at these days. But he believes that capitalism is essentially finished. Yeah. What we're dealing with is a kind of, what does he call it? This kind of techno-feudalism where these big platforms run the world. There isn't a free market in a sense. You join other people's platforms, Amazon, eBay, whoever they may be, and you play by their rules. So let's set that aside for a minute, but at least it's a decent enough kind of analysis of where the power lies at the moment. So these platforms are very powerful. You're, back in the day, invited to join Amazon, and that's a great opportunity, but it also comes with presumably some potential risks. So tell us about that process and tell us what you've learned dealing with these sharks, shall we say, that run the world.
Yeah, I think necessary evil would be too harsh of a description, to be honest. And you have to deal with the realities of where your customer are. And is it massively different from sort of shops going into shopping centres and retail parks and dealing with big landlords? And do they make retail for independents difficult? Possibly, yes. And certain ones are worse than others in terms of you just have to be very aware you're playing in their arena. You're subject to their rules, and as long as you know that going in, I don't think we've found much of a problem with it. And for us, that's the function of how we get to our customer. Like, it's always been about two things for us: building the best product brand that we can, because ultimately that's what we are. We're retailers, yes, we're direct to consumer retailers, but we're first and foremost a product brand. What we care about is the product, the rugs, bringing the best rugs to the market we can in the current trends and styles that people are looking for. And the second part of that then is meeting the customer where they are. And the reality is we all use Google, and eventually AI is going to do a lot of it for us. And there's no point in sort of being dogged and staying away from these channels because of the horror stories and the reality of some of them, if that's who your customer is. So it's prickly. There's a lot of not very nice stuff goes on with some of them in terms of their practices and, the levels that the wholesalers to, but that's where customers are. And you just have to play in that world. And I would prefer to look at it as an opportunity at this point. They are the big guys. They are the ones with the power. They are the platforms that customers shop on. If you play the game with them, it's where you'll do business ultimately. So I think the key is not to hand the entire power over to any one or two channels. Like, we have certainly found you can spread yourself too thin. You can be over too many channels and it's too hard to manage. But I wouldn't want to be particularly big on any one of them. I'd want to make sure that the brand was available across multiple different channels. And I think the important thing is that you build the brand to be what you want the brand to be, and that operates on its own strength and on its own platform, and the customers can find out about you and about the brand and decide then where they're going to buy it. Because I know we would ultimately say, like, as long as financially it stacks up, we don't really mind where we sell it, as long as customers want to buy a Kukoon rug and not a competitor's rug.
So that brand building is really important.
Brand building is really important. While techno-feudalism's possibly a small bit dramatic, I don't think Yanis is actually that far away to the mark. Like, organic traffic, whether you're talking about social or Google, is all but dead for the purposes of creating a genuine trading business.
Yeah, just to be clear on that means that people think, I can create content which will be shared and go viral or whatever. It won't unless you're paying. You're in the unicorn category when you're building a genuine viable business off organic content. You're a small kind of Fred in the shed where you can build a business that you'll get a salary out of with organic content, or there's once in a couple of thousand, phenomenal organic creators can build a business out of it.
For everyone else, you've got to pay the check. And it doesn't matter, like at the time Amazon was 65% of our business, and that was a scary spot to be in, because Amazon can go and copy your listing tomorrow and take it over. They can actually use your listing with your 10 years of reviews and put their product into it. They have contacted us and asked us for our purchase invoices for some of our key lines as proof that we are the genuine owner of the brand product. But it's really just for them to get the information they need to go and speak to your factories. We've always known not to give them that direct information, but they've found our factories anyway and gone and contacted them. So Amazon's has been a big fish for many years, has a lot of really what we would call normally really poor practices, but that's part of the game. They have the customer base. But then you go to our website now, which is by far and away the biggest, tranche of our business. Meta is a huge ticket in there, and it's really Meta and Google. We have to pay both of them for the vast majority of our customers, even though we're doing a lot of brand work, we're doing a lot of above the line work. Eventually the funnel, when you get to the conversion part of the funnel, both Meta and Google are so strong in there, and they're so big and so have so much power that the concept of turning them off for 3 months to genuinely test what your brand funnel is like without them, it's just not viable for most businesses. So yeah, these huge technology companies have the power, they have the customers, they have our attention, and they have customer attention, and you can't avoid them. It's kind of, you got to find your way to get in there with them and make it work.
So the key thing is, if you're thinking about selling online, you've got to be prepared to put that investment in. You've got to play by those rules, because there's nobody else's rules that you can play by. And so therefore you've got to factor that into your business model. People might think, the costs of say doing business or buying the product, general overheads, selling the product, and then you've got the kind of margin in there. But presumably there's a big chunk that you've got to set aside for your online marketing, whether you say paying Google or Meta, whoever it may be, to make sure people can find you.
If you look at Business 101 books coming out of America now, or guides coming out of America, you'll generally see that the marketing makeup of your cost base is now higher than the product cost. So most general standard online business models are talking about a product cost between 20 and 30% and a marketing cost between 30 and 40%. There's variation in there, but essentially you're paying more to acquire the customer than you are actually to buy the product to then give to the customer. And like, to go back 20 years to where we started, that sounds absolutely crazy, but for the market we're in now, we can see that's where it's going. That the actual cost of the physical item isn't as expensive as the cost of finding the customer attention.
Yeah, and maybe that compares a little bit to what you're saying, Claire. I mean, it does seem a bit crazy, and maybe it seems unfair, but that's just the way it is. But as you say, if you were trading physically, you'd be paying a landlord, you'd be paying rates, you'd be paying all sorts of other things maybe you're not doing necessarily if you're trading online.
And probably still the marketing costs on top of it, because I think if you just put your own consumer hat on, where you find product physically in store or online, you're probably very largely influenced by meta companies, by Facebook, by Instagram, or by TikTok, by Google. So it's probably unrealistic to think that you're not going to, be it in store or online, have to pay those extortionately high marketing costs. The brand building piece, obviously, the long-term aim is to try and make brand loyal customers. So you're paying a very high price to acquire customers the first time. You're hoping to make them brand loyal through the product and the service and the brand identity and all. But like, realistically, who of us are brand loyal really much? You may be for a period of time until somebody else grabs your attention. You're going to have to pay to get it back at some point. So for us, it's just been a bit realistic from day one. Like, we're going to have to pay that cost, build the business around that. Don't fight it.
The macro statistics tell us now we're all less brand loyal, and we're getting less brand loyal every year that goes by. So that means we're all trying to build brands. We're all more in a little bit of a trading business, setup than we would like to have been, or than we considered being 20 years ago. So that's just, you have to factor that in the business going forward. I don't think there's any way around that.
Now, tell me though about the multiple platforms then, because somebody could choose just purely, I want to set up an online business and I want to sell just through my website. But that you would suggest maybe try and branch out a bit more. Have your for most businesses, you'll want to have a presence elsewhere too.
Yeah, there's obviously variables, but these other platforms have customers. And you can go to your own website, but you will have to go and get customers. The concept that you list products on a site and they're going to start selling is all but dead. So you will have to go to market and start marketing your website and start marketing your brand, drive customers to that. There's a lot of complexity to how you do that, even though platforms are becoming easier to spend money on. Like Google and Meta both have a lot of AI and automation built into their tools that you can serve content, spend in a more stable fashion and drive customers in. It's still much more complicated and normally much more expensive than going to sell on a third party platform like Amazon or eBay, or, as I said, like a Debenhams or a B&Q, something like that. So if you have a good product, if you have, say, a product that's a nice fit for a B&Q type brand, and you can get a listing on their site, they're generally going to bring customers to you at a more stable and also a cheaper rate than you will get building a brand from zero on a Shopify site.
Yeah, and so just it's about knowing the complexities of each of those platforms, each of those marketing channels, and working at it, building that in, and making sure that there must be presumably some sort of consistency across that though as well, because you can't sell something on your website that is either way ahead of price or way under what you're selling in other channels, presumably.
Technically, you can for some of them. Some of them aren't bothered about the price parity. Some of them are. But obviously, from the consumer point of view, it's not the thing you want to be doing. But yeah, like I think it's become a lot more straightforward listing on different platforms than it was even 5-6 years ago. It's a lot of them now have central platforms themselves, and it's the same central platform that serve 5, 6, 7 different retailers, and a lot more retailers just within your own industry. But I think as well, you can't underestimate the credibility to the customer piece as well. You know, we're bombarded with noise at the minute. Like there's new companies, new brands coming at you from every direction. How do you actually filter out the brands that you want to shop with, to do business with? You know, it's not just about those platforms. There's numerous different ways of doing it, but those platforms are one way where if somebody's never heard of you before, if you're a brand new startup brand, on your own website or on a platform from a retailer that the customer knows and trusts, you're just much more likely to get that sale. And I believe you then have the chance to convert them to maybe your own site, your own channels, and get the sale that way. There's a bit of work going into that as well, but the opportunity is there. So it's very much that acquiring customer piece, what you do after that. You know, and again, we've come away. I think our plan a few years ago would have always been you acquire them and then transfer them. But actually, that's not happening in a lot of cases. A lot of times people are just buying where it comes up, buying with whoever has got the ad space with Google or, you know, so it's just about getting the product out there as much as anything. And it's the same with influencers, the same with social media. Like it's really where people are seeing the product, seeing the content, and it's about that spread essentially because it's noisier than ever and we're all going in different directions. You know, it used to be you went to Google or you went to the high street. You know, it's just not that simple anymore, and it's a costly business and one that you can spend a lot of money getting wrong.
But I think that's important to clarify. Like when we talk about going to other channels, it's not to acquire a customer. It's our historical data tells us that less than 2% of customers that buy from other channels then transition onto our own website. You're acquiring a sale, so you're selling a product and you're making a margin on that product. Hopefully, the expectation that customer will then get your product, open it, get your really nicely presented package, and then go back to your own website. That's our own experience has been that's a very difficult thing to generate. And anecdotally speaking to other brands, we've never spoken to anyone who's made a really successful business from doing a first point of sale on another channel and then transitioning that customer onto their own channel and moving from there.
What you can hope is that they get to know the brand. So if you've done a good enough job, say for us, of getting Kukoon out there for the point of purchase, at the point of receiving the product and follow-up communication, if you become maybe less obsessed about where they buy the second or third time, but become obsessed with them buying your product on any of these channels, it feels a more likely route to success, just because, as Paul said, that transference just in reality isn't there.
Those are fairly harsh kind of lessons for somebody to learn if they haven't thought about that, you know, aren't they? Because I have heard people talk about, well, you know, we'll get it out here, say via Amazon, but then we want to get them onto our website where we can sort of make a bigger margin and build that customer loyalty. And what you're saying,
look at Nike. Nike went back. Like you'll not get a much bigger example of a big brand who done exactly that and who thought that they could cut these guys out. They're Nike at the end of the day, but they went back. Like they had to go back onto these channels because it was just having too big of an impact on the bottom line for them. So
I think for us the number's sub 2% of transition. Anecdotally speaking, other companies, we've never spoken to anyone that has north of 5% transition. As a customer, if you put your customer hat on for a second, you buy on Amazon because it's so easy. You know, you buy on Next or whatever site you use because you have an affinity with what they do and they have next day delivery and things like that. You very rarely arrive and see a product and see a brand and love it so much and want to go. I think we've all done it to some point, but you don't do it with any regularity. Like the level of connection you have to have with the brand that makes you think, right, I'll now go to their website and buy from them separately. It's just not human nature. So it's not a business model or a way of working that I think has a viable future.
Yeah, so I think just for people who are in business now, in that kind of direct to consumer business, who are thinking about their online operations, I think some really good lessons there, which is be realistic, as you say. I mean, I think I hadn't realized about Nike, but that's a really good example. A brand as big as that has to go back and pay to play
Yep.
on these platforms, and doesn't expect everybody to be converted to come over to their website. Then you can see why. And I mean, again, your point, Paul, about the simplicity with Amazon, it is that simplicity, reliability. They have the infrastructure. If you order something from them, generally it will arrive pretty quickly if you're on Amazon Prime or whatever it might be. And that's it. It's the kind of hassle-free nature of it, isn't it?
Yeah, when you sort of put your macro hat on and you understand how we all operate as consumers, we're all hit with more information than ever, more decisions than ever. We want to make things as simple as we possibly can, and it's whatever few channels do that for us is where we tend to shop. And I, as someone who sold Amazon for 20 years and really dislike so many of their practices, buy off them pretty much daily, and that's, so it's better the devil you know and better the process, and you have to look at your customer hat and think, right, how are customers then going to operate within your industry, and you have to then accordingly move with them. The sort of brighter note I would say on that is our experience is trading at scale isn't any more expensive on any of those channels than it is in your own channel. So it's not a case of that you're making less money. It's just normally a case that you don't have that customer ownership of the customer detail, and you don't have that opportunity to connect with your customer and follow up with them and bring them into your sort of your world and your email and social connections and build that brand affinity. You don't have any of that. But in terms of a sale by sale, it's every bit as profitable for the business as selling on your own channel if you're doing both at scale.
So let's just then go back to what we think of as kind of traditional sales. Then you've got 2 retail outlets, as you've said, not a huge proportion of the business, but important to have, presumably, for some reason. So I'll let you explain that. And but tell us about your kind of genesis and picking up the sales skills, if you like, at the markets then. So you were helping your dad at that stage, is that right? Selling stuff just around various markets, was it?
Yeah. So he would have at any one time been doing 5 or 6 different markets. We would have went with him all summer and at the weekends and stuff, and it was definitely a great learning experience. I'm pretty sure both of us swore that we were never going into retail. We certainly were never doing markets. We weren't selling rugs and we were never going into retail. But I think market life tends to do that to you. But he wasn't, he certainly wasn't an educated man. He wasn't very well read, but he understood retail and he understood customers, and we probably learned a lot what not to do from him, but we learned an awful lot from him about, really how you make customers happy, and about, he was the kind of person, sorry, I'm talking in the past tense, he passed away sadly a few years ago, but he was the kind of man that, like, he stayed there to the end. He was there first thing in the morning. We were the last people to pack up in the evening. If it was 3 foot of snow, we were still there, much against our wishes. But his thought on it was, if a customer expects you to be there at 5 in the evening, because you're normally there at 5 at the evening, well then you're there at 5 in the evening. And he knew the customers wanted choice and they wanted to get a bit of value and to do a deal with them and to give a nice experience. So this is a market stall, it's iron bars and tables, and it's freezing cold usually outside, and a cover flapping over your head, and it's not what most of us would think of a particularly nice experience, but he managed to do it. He would have spent time with customers and he would have shown them lots of different rugs. If they had to come with a cushion to match something, he wouldn't have been happy till he had 10 rugs out for them to have a look at. And unbeknownst to us at the time, obviously, and probably for the early years of the business too, we didn't realise that we had picked that up from him. We understood some of the very fundamental basics of retail that, in my opinion, don't change no matter the platform, no matter the time. They are timeless principles of what customers expect.
Yeah, because the big difference now, presumably, with your online, you mentioned, say, for instance, if you're on one of the other platforms like Amazon, you're not even getting the customer information, but even from your own website, you're getting information, and quite detailed information, which I suppose is really useful in terms of how you market, but you're not really conversing with them, you're not talking to them, you're not seeing their facial expressions or whatever as you're making that sale. So there is something quite fundamentally different about that face-to-face selling, whether it be at the market or perhaps even in a retail store. And what do you think, you have learnt from that you're still applying to your business today, and why, Paul, have you got the retail operations still going?
Yeah, so exactly as you summarised, the thing we've learned in store is that there's so much nuance to customer decision making process, and how they're thinking about going through our products, how they're thinking about what they want for their home. You just can't. There's no online survey that gives you that experience and gives you that knowledge, and there's no way of interacting with the customer online. Like, you could phone customers, and we do phone customers, regularly to get feedback, but it's a different level of experience. Like, when a customer comes into your store, they've got time and they've got a little bit of energy to give you that feedback, that engagement. You can watch what they're interested in, what they're not interested in. You pick up a level of detail you can't pick up online. They're also brilliant for credibility. There's a lot of businesses sell online, but once you have that retail kind of roots, that retail footprint, people who see that online feel like, okay, that's a more established brand. And it's brilliant for social content as well. I think when you look at any company's socials, when you see their own stores, when you see their own customers interacting, when you see us doing events in our stores, you feel like that's a brand I have more affinity to and more of a natural connection with. And I think it's probably a human nature thing. We're all looking for trust signals. Like, that a brand is really a shortcut for trust, and a retail store and multiple retail stores plays a part in that. Customers just see a brand that they know and recognise, or see a store that they sense, even if they've never been in it. Like, a lot of people talk about stores that you love and they only exist in London, and you feel like you know that brand because they've done their store tours and their store visits and things like that, and you just have a greater affinity with it. And that's what we think our retail stores give us, and we think there's a lot of growth opportunity in them, actually, because a lot of what we're doing really well online is starting to transfer brilliantly in store. So we've seen our stores, even though they're a smaller part of our business, they've had a phenomenal growth year, have far exceeded all expectations. So we have a lot of excitement for the year ahead.
Hi there. I'm just interrupting for a minute to thank you for being part of the Trading Up community. It's really appreciated. I think we're building a real community of business and entrepreneurship learning. So remember to hit follow or subscribe. It makes a big difference. And please drop me an email on tradinguppodcast@gmail.com. And while I have you, just a quick word about our sponsors, EY. EY's technology experts simplify the complex, whether it's AI, cryptocurrencies, or emerging innovations, empowering you to reimagine what's possible and shape the future with confidence. And EY is committed to positively impacting 1 billion lives by 2030. EY helps organizations embed sustainability at the core of their strategy, driving long-term value for business, people, and the planet. That's it for now. Let's get back to the conversation. And presumably you'll have people who'll come to the stores physically, have a good check around, talk to you or other sales people there, and then maybe they go and order online ultimately. It's kind of that combination.
We don't talk about that, Jim. Our in-store sales teams are very sore on that, because they generally spend a lot of time and energy with customers. And as you say, there's going back to the basics of human nature. You come to a point where you're spending a decent amount of money on a product that's maybe on a rug that's going to sit in the middle of your living room for the next number of years. You have to go home and maybe speak to your other half, or go home and just have a little bit of a last think about it. And like, we get that a lot, where they've done all of the heavy lifting in store, and then the online team get the credit for the sale, and that hurts, but that is part of the trade. And as a business, we don't commission or enthuse people based on where sales happen. It's more of a pride thing, and teams like to feel that they're doing really well, and that the efforts that they've put in have been well rewarded. So look, we're working ways to better connect those dots. But yes, it's part of customer behaviour.
Yeah, and I remember again reading about one of the most sort of counterintuitive things that Steve Jobs did with Apple. One of the most revolutionary things he did, in a sense, wasn't the invention of the iPhone, but it was the determination to open retail stores, the investment in Apple stores to create these temples to the products. And that's why, Apple suddenly, once they had the iPhone, everything else was taking off way beyond Samsung or anybody else, because there was this place that you went to where it was all about that Apple world. Now, maybe rugs don't have that same crossover effect, but there's an element of that, isn't there? That just, it's, you can touch and feel it, you can trust, as you say.
Again, it's putting that customer hat on, like how you feel about brands that do have a store and don't have a store. And it's on a subconscious level. Like, none of us go out looking for a product or come upon a product and connect these dots or think about this in your own head. But if you start to think about some of the brands you love, there's a very real possibility that a lot of them will have stores, and a store that you might not even ever stand in. And to the point Paul referenced earlier, there's something about that feeling, even if you only see it online, but obviously it's much better if you get to experience it in reality, where you can go in and see that brand come to life, because you can see a brand through the people working in the stores, how the stores merchandise, the look and the feel of it. And it does, to my mind, give a brand much more credibility, much more of the trustability factor as well. It talks more about who the brand is. So I know some of the brands that I personally love, they do a lot of content in their stores, and that helps me understand who they are from the way they talk and how they talk about their own product and stuff. And it's part of their brand identity. So I think for us, that's the part of the retail expansion that we see going forward, through our own retail stores, through partnerships with other retailers, where customers will get to actually physically see the Kukoon brand and get a better understanding of it, because there's only so much you can do online. It is very hard to build a credible brand story without some kind of physical presence. Now, that doesn't have to always be retail stores. Like, we would do the trade shows, and there's no profit involved in those whatsoever. They're connecting to the customer. They're given the opportunity for the customers to meet our teams and to really get a sense of who Kukoon are as a brand, and they're very impactful.
Yeah, so the scale that you're at now, 20 odd million turnover, you have your own fulfillment, you organise and fulfill all your own orders from your warehouse in Uri.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't just now about going and buying stuff off the shelf or from different suppliers. You're much more involved in the nature of the rugs, the styling of them. Tell us about that, how that's kind of evolved and how that fits into your overall business strategy.
Yeah, so that's one of our key USPs, and it actually has been for quite a while. So we were one of the first independents to design our own rugs. Every rug we bring in is designed by our own team, and the good thing about that is it allows us to be very reactive. The UK and Ireland are very small economies on the world stage. Most of our manufacturers, most of our mills are in India, in Turkey, in Belgium, as Paul said. They're not overly bothered about the trends in the UK and Ireland. This is becoming less of an issue because of social media. The whole world has become much more homogenous. We're all following the same trends and the same styles. But certainly 10 years ago, we had our own look. We had our own sort of vibe going on, but we could never find rugs to match it. They weren't available off the shelf. You were always sort of buying the American trend or the European trend. So that was the genesis of why we first started to explore the design route ourselves. And neither me nor Paul are particularly artistic. I personally have always loved homewares, have always had a huge interest in that area. So it was a very natural progression for me. The challenge for us then was to plug in the design function and to build out our own team of designers. And we wouldn't change that at all now. That's one of our strongest kind of identifiers, is our ability to be really reactive to current trends. If there's a colour just suddenly takes off, say burgundy has just become huge out of nowhere. It wasn't a growing colour. It just within a couple of months became huge. We can react to that. We can have rugs in the building in 8 weeks to match that trend.
In 8 weeks, that's impressive, yeah.
Yep. So that's now not across all qualities, but certainly across our mainline qualities. On the quality front as well, we've been particularly pioneering. So we've launched sort of a lot of washable collections over the last year or two that traditional retailers and wholesalers and all, they just wouldn't offer it. I think us designing the product and being incredibly product focused, we visit our factories multiple times in the year. It just allows us to always make sure we're bringing the best product to the market at the best prices. And coming back to what we were talking about earlier, it is hard to be a retailer. It's very hard to be a brand, but in some ways it's become easier because you can get the message out to customers. It's a little bit more of an even playing field for getting content out there if you're willing to pay. But you need to have content for customers. It is very hard to just sell a very generic product now because there's so much competition and so much noise that you actually have to think of your product in terms of, well, what is the customer going to... You have probably about 3 seconds to hook them. 3 seconds to get them to stop the scroll and to pay attention to what you have. That's very hard to do with a very generic product. So again, we've decided probably to become a little bit more niche. Our business plan 7 or 8 years ago would have been sort of all conquering, all qualities, all prices, all styles, all trends. And we've recognised that that's not the right direction of travel for us. It is actually to stay in the lane that's working, and it's very much focusing on trend styles and colours and very functional product, stuff that's washable, stuff that people can really go, God, that's a great product.
So that's kind of where you're at with the business model and so on. But you're sitting here talking to me in the podcast, and I suppose we started talking about, the brand evolving. It doesn't say Newry across the top of the door or anything. This is an international brand. And yet it seems to me nowadays when you look at a lot of businesses, and you're doing it now by taking part in this podcast, and I've seen some of your other social media, you're yourselves fronting up a little bit as well now. Is that important because of this whole trust thing, that people want to know who's behind the business? They're not necessarily concerned with its physical location, but they want to see the people behind it as well.
Yeah, I think we're not particularly comfortable probably being in front of the camera and doing all that, but it's very, very clear that consumers really engage with founders and founder stories and finding out who's behind a brand and who's behind a product. And as Claire said, we really love the product and we want to make the product front and centre, but customers can only connect with the product so much online. Then they need to see a little bit more of the story around that, and the founder story is a big part of that. And probably the bad news for us is that the founder story, like the click-through rates, the thumbs up rates on there are really strong, that it's clear that customer credibility and engagement with the brand goes up when the more they see of that kind of content. So our marketing team want to see more and more of that, and that's unfortunately where we're going to have to go.
The industry has moved on in terms of, we would have been very cautious probably in the first 15 years of the business to never mention where we were from, because you're trying to build eventually an international brand, but certainly beginning UK and Ireland, you have, again, putting the customer hat on, they're thinking about returns, delivery costs. We were cautious to sort of have a face or identity of any sort, because we wanted somebody to think of Kukoon, which is, it could be in London, it could be in Dublin, it could be in Paris, to have that feeling about the brand. And that's really not where it's at for small independents. Being faceless is not the direction to go. Like Paul said,
but it is a good point actually, and it's took the statistics for us to get past that. 2/3 of our business is more than 2/3 of our business is in GB, and we were afraid that our accent might have customers just thinking, hang on, these guys, there's a puddle of water between us, that's a problem for a big bulky rug, and there's maybe a trust factor just goes down. There's we and they, and there's just a slight nothing, it's just human nature. The stats don't suggest that. The stats suggest that when the more that content people see, the more they engage with the brand. So yeah, I think you're right. You're seeing a lot of brands do it now,
and it's a plus as well of that homogenous. It's one of the only sort of big pluses of social media and stuff, is that we're becoming more global. Like, people aren't as bothered and obsessed with, it must be buying from somebody that looks like me or sounds like me, and of course, like, there is a real positive around buying local, and that's okay if you can buy the product locally, but actually there's a lot of businesses built on international sales, and I think sometimes we forget that supports jobs as well, and it supports the economy. And while it is really important to back local businesses and support local and trade local, businesses trading internationally now bring money into economies and bring jobs to economies, so they do. And it's needs to be a little bit of a hybrid of both. And customers have got very savvy. Like, it's not, we're all buying from companies based in God knows where. Like, people are good at sort of researching themselves about delivery costs, return costs and all. So it's not something to be afraid of in the manner it was. And I think if you were talking to a 20-year-old now, they'd be like, what are you talking about? It wouldn't even occur to them as an issue.
Yeah.
But it actually was for the first sort of 15 years of our business. Like, we were extremely cautious and very, very careful about remaining faceless and having no identity, really.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, how that's changed, isn't it?
But maybe, maybe too much. So if you, different industries completely, but if you look at the likes of Brenton at Be Perfect, he's gone the total opposite, and he's had a phenomenal business, and he's one of those rare unicorns that has done a lot of it organically, by building a phenomenal business, built around him, and his persona and how he connects with consumers. And that business is phenomenally good in Ireland and in England, and he's never had that barrier, which is phenomenal to see.
Yeah, and we're seeing actually been a number of kind of brands in that kind of cosmetic and makeup space coming out of Northern Ireland, and there is something about, I suppose, is it the relatability that people see that, previously you would have thought anything that was a kind of makeup brand or cosmetics had to be, if you like, high end, had to be sort of led by models that you didn't know their names or whatever it was. And now it seems to be much more, yes, there's influencers involved showing how they get ready or get made up, whatever it is. But as you said, founders as well involved. And it's not so, it's much more, kind of honest, relatable. And
relatable content. That's genuine, and that's different for different people. And it's just about understanding who your customer is, what your industry is, and what's relatable to your customers, and then tapping into that. So that's going to be very different in different industries. But I think that principle is the same across the board.
I mean, I think of the old Woody Allen line, sincerity is everything, and if you can fake that, you've really got it made. But, there does have to be an element of truth at the bottom of it all. And bottom line is, your story is real, brother and sister, building it up, learning, in the markets, selling first on eBay, pioneers in this space. But it's not like you have to make anything up. This is all essentially what you're doing. You're focused on quality and so on. So, if you want to be relatable and you want to be authentic, you've got to start with being actually authentic.
But again, even in that, I think for a long time we were ashamed is too harsh a word, but reluctant to certainly talk about a market background, because for certain people that's connotations as well of, don't know, but is that a bit dodgy now? We just didn't mention it. It wasn't part of our story. Like, we started at dead hot and didn't really mention that so much. And then, now that probably is really in the early days. We've been telling that story for quite a while, but I think it's probably only the last 5 or 6 years where we've been told that actually customers love that for that very reason, that it is authentic. That's how this business came to be. That's how we are who we are and what we do. And, I think people appreciate that, in a world that is full of a lot of bluster and all is just an honest story.
And I think with the acceleration of AI, the quality and the availability of AI content now, genuine relatability and a little bit more authentic content that's, a little bit rougher around the edges is going to have an even higher value in 2026. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed like my kids are much more perceptive about spotting AI. My youngest, who's 17, if she would be very critical of anybody using AI content. So the kids are very much honed in on that. And while I think it's a kind of slightly older, I don't know what age plus, let's say 40 plus, we're likely to be more fooled by AI content. And I think that's what's really interesting. They kind of, they don't want to see that. They want kind of a bit more authenticity. Yeah.
Which is good to see and good to hear. And those guys will have an eye for it that we just won't have, because we haven't grown up with it, whereas they're going to have grown up really, really picking the differences. So for brands like ours, the temptation to lean into AI is very high, because there's huge opportunities to create unbelievable content at a far lower cost. But there's a whole cohort of people out there that will instantly tell the difference, where maybe our age group struggles. So it's just trying to find that line where you can use it for a little bit of augmentation of good content, but you can't use it for ground up building content just yet.
Yeah, just be careful. Yeah, be careful with how you use it. So listen, we've had a great overview and some really good tips, I think, for people who are thinking about selling online or thinking about developing their business in different ways. But it all sounds very positive, and it is. But there must surely have been times along the way when you thought, really, was this a wise decision? Any of those big moments, kind of hidden in there that you want to tell us about, big crises or something you thought, this is just too much, or how you've overcome a big challenge?
Yeah, we're probably like every business. No business has a straight run, to a good position. No, we probably went into COVID as a sort of nice small local business, trebled in size in a year, and obviously rode that kind of online COVID wave and had a phenomenal spell. Got very excited about it all. Didn't have enough structures in place. It was a brother and sister kind of just run the business and making decisions on the fly. And we ended up way over investing in the business, borrowing a lot of money that was really easily available to all businesses, and especially businesses like ours, investing a huge amount in operations and people and structure. And we kind of ran the business to a point where if it wasn't doing 25 million a year, it wasn't making money, and it wasn't doing 25 million a year, it wasn't close to it. So we ended up having to close a warehouse we'd opened over in Liverpool. We ended up having to make, I think, 32 redundancies. We lost £1 million that year, and it was without doubt the most stressful year in our business lives. And I think there was so much going on, it was all happening so fast, and the whole business was so immature that we were 6 months in before we realised just how bad it was, and I think the stress of that and the pressure of that, and coming from our best year ever, which the year before had been, to our worst year ever very shortly after, just was a big shock to the system. And while we can look back now and say actually it's probably the best thing that's ever happened to us, because it's given us an edge and a sharpness and a clarity of mind going forward, that year was without doubt the toughest we've had.
Yeah, and that's unusual in a sense that COVID became an opportunity for you because of the online opportunities. And it's unusual because, as you say, you went from a brilliant year to perhaps the worst year because of that overinvestment.
Yeah.
So how have you taken the learnings from that and sort of changed the way that you do business? What's the structure of things like today compared to what it was before?
I think, as Paul said, prior to that, like, we were responsible for all of the decision making, good and bad. I can't remember the exact timeline, but one of the first things we done in the year or two after was to put a board in place. So we have 2 other executive directors, and then we have 4 non-exec directors. We have board meetings every quarter, and we have a big one annually. And there isn't really a decision of any significance whatsoever that doesn't run through that process. And I think that's slowed us down a bit. We're, I think, very typical entrepreneurs, like we like a good shiny object, and we tend to get bored quite quickly, which can be detrimental to a scaling business. And it's give us a proper framework to put decisions through. So instead of, like, there's still things we very much would want to do, and the board kind of has to tone us down a little bit, but it makes us properly think about decisions and stress test it and look at every possible angle, get all of the advice we need, but before making any rash decisions. So became an awful lot more critical on the data. So I think we're probably one of the leading businesses in Northern Ireland on the data front, in terms of we have a wealth of data available on all sales and all sales channels and product lines, and it's allowing us to get much closer to the reality of the picture. So not sort of going months at a time, waiting maybe on a set of accounts, assuming things that are not reality. So it's not perfect by any means, but I think they're probably the 2 main things that we changed very quickly.
And putting a board in place that's something that people running their own business might think, well, look, I'm running the business, I make the decisions, therefore the buck stops with me. But if you're putting a board in place with non-executive directors, you're handing some authority over to them at the very least, because they're not going to sit around and turn up for meetings if they're not listened to. So you're giving something up, and presumably there's a cost involved as well. You have to pay people for their time. And somebody looking at that, whether they're in the same sort of business as you or anybody else, but if they're running this show and it's all been relatively successful to date, they might say, why would I get involved and do that and have somebody else tell me what to do? So what would you say back to them?
Mm-hmm. If you've been lucky enough to be in business for quite a few years and not made costly mistakes, well, then fair play, you maybe don't need a board. But I don't think that's true for very many businesses at all. So on the cost side of things, the mistakes you make are costly. And I'm not saying that you definitely won't make them, but I certainly feel you're much less likely to make those costly mistakes with a board in place, for the very basis that people who are entrepreneurial make decisions quickly. They take action quickly. Sometimes that's the right thing, and a lot of times it isn't. The parameters and the guide rails that are in place there now just slow us down enough to make sure the decision is correct. And I don't think there is a cost, because I think the mistakes that we have avoided from having the board in place has saved us money, in all honesty. I don't think any entrepreneurs like being told what to do. I don't think they like... it's maybe been a little bit easier in some ways for me and Paul than it would be for a sole trader, because we had each other to fight with. So quite often one would want to do something and the other one wouldn't. And we'd end up in a bit of a loggerhead in terms of what are we going to do. So a board actually was a real sort of breath of fresh air, because it meant that if we ended up in a position where we weren't agreeing on something, well, we had a board to put it to who would very quickly help us get to a conclusion or figure out which direction of travel was right. So maybe if you're by yourself and you've all the control, you've all the power, I think even more so you probably need a board around you, or a sounding board, because it is hard to get enough decisions right to really scale a business and to grow it. Especially the bigger you get, the costs of the mistakes are huge, and the level of expertise you need, just most of us don't have them, and that's, you in particular put a lot of time into making sure the board we had in place were really covering off what we knew to be our gaps, where our skill gaps were, where the blind spots were, where they still are. And like, that changes too. So as much as anything, it's about keeping the board fresh and up to date, that as the business scales and moves on to the next journey, the board is the right board to go on that journey. And I could not recommend it enough. Like, it's something we've talked about to several other businesses who have had common tours and stuff. Until you experience it, it's hard to really explain it to people, but it's been invaluable.
Yeah, and first thing to say is like a board. And when we looked at this, we were a wee bit scared as well. But a board is whatever you want it to be. You know, it's whatever size and scale and has as much power as you give it. You know, and probably the most accurate name for our board is an advisory board, because ultimately we are the decision makers, and we have gone against the wishes of the board at times. And but when you're doing that, when you hire people with expertise and experience and quality, and they tell you, you know, give you their opinion, that carries a lot of weight. So it just means that if me and Claire disagree with it, we have to have a lot of conviction and a lot of clarity and be able to explain, you know, clearly to 4 non-execs why we're taking the decision we're taking. That just makes your decision making process better and stronger. And as Claire said, like we didn't know how good it would be until we got there, and we would advise other people to go down that same road. I didn't think it'd be quoting Colin Powell, but you know, you don't know what you don't know. Like the unknown unknowns out there are absolutely huge, and you get a combined maybe 120 or 140 years of business experience into a room. The knowledge and wisdom they have with little words, little questions, you know, and again, like most good advisory boards like this, they're not normally giving answers, they're just normally asking good questions. And when they ask good questions, we're forced to be a bit more introspective to make better decisions. And since we brought the board in place, the business has gone from strength to strength and has so much more in the tank. And I think that's it. The results prove for us that it's been a really good decision.
Yeah, and I think one of the big points out of this is that for businesses who've been, you know, gone through the early years where they think that's where all the struggle is, and as you say, it was maybe borrowing money on credit cards, getting a car loan, doing all that kind of stuff. You think when you're past all of that, you kind of know everything, and the money's coming in, the turnover's growing, the profits are growing, happy days. But then you can run into a year such as you had where you've totally overinvested, then suddenly everything's the reverse. You know, the challenges with a bigger business can be just as scary or more scary, and you can suddenly go from, you know, so profit to loss quite quickly. So I think some really, really useful points in that. Just want to finish with one thing, which is really about the values that you've kind of got in your company. And one of the things that you've stood out for over the last year is standing up for kind of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And you've raised a lot of money for that in conjunction with Concern and local charities. But it's potentially a risk for businesses to sort of get involved in issues, a risk you were willing to take. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it's something that probably me and Claire spent certainly most of a lot of 2025 kind of wringing our hands, kind of saying how can what's happening in Gaza, which is effectively in our view a genocide, how can that be allowed to happen in the Western world in 2025? And we spent a large portion of the year kind of going, why are politicians not doing more? Why are people not doing more? And we kind of got to a point where we were thinking, well, what have we done? Have we done enough? And we spent a number of weeks going, you know, around that loop, kind of going, well, look, we're in business. Northern Ireland's it's a divisive topic here. I think outside of Northern Ireland, it's not just as divisive. It's a little bit more clear cut. In Northern Ireland, it's definitely divisive. But after a number of weeks, we kind of came to a conclusion that our conscience wouldn't let us kind of keep giving off in the background without feeling like we should go and do something. So we went to the board, got a lot of advice, got a lot of guidance, ended up working with Oxfam on a very big, you know, direct to consumer kind of appeal, and then with Concern on a B2B, business to business appeal, you know, and both appeals were phenomenally successful and had a lot of engagement. And there was definitely some blowback. There's no doubt about that. You know, it's just a divisive topic, and that's it. You're not going to agree with everyone. I think internally, especially, but both internally and externally, there has been an overwhelming outpouring of people going, "Jeepers, yeah, we feel totally helpless, and the opportunity to go and do something has been brilliant. So thanks for providing that outlet." And we feel that the company and the brand has gained, you know, in net terms, it's been a big gain for the business. For us, it's just something that we kind of felt we should do, and we had to
What
do.
were the numbers around it? Just remind us of what was raised then with the different campaigns.
The two combined, we were just shy of 200,000 raised and donated to the two charities. So look, it's a phenomenal amount of money, and we didn't think we'd get that far. And at the same time, in the scale of what's going on in Gaza, it's a tiny, you know, number. And Oxfam give us fantastic updates every month on some of the projects they're working on and some of the things that are happening. And you know, there's you have 5 or 10% of pride, and you have 90% of just, you know, empathy and pain for what's going on. And it doesn't. I realised I thought I'd feel better after doing something, and in a weird way, I almost feel worse because I feel one step closer to everything that's happening out there, and just can't comprehend it. So yeah, for us, probably we put the business a little bit at risk for our own personal beliefs. But in the end, we thought it was the best, most aligned thing for what we wanted. And we also, sorry to caveat, some people asked us why did we do it in public, and the reason was because it is still a little bit political, and we don't think it is political. We think it's humanitarian, and we were trying to help to move that debate on 1% by sort of going, look, this isn't a who's right and who's wrong. There's a lot of people being treated in a horrible way, and I think we need to move the political debate on to how do we stop this.
Yeah, and it is that humanitarian focus that I think your campaigns had, and by tying in with two very reputable charities there, Oxfam and Concern. But the blowback as well, though, I think even any anecdotes about that, whether internally, where it can be divisive amongst a workforce, presumably, or externally amongst customers. Have you any sense of that, or anybody tell you anything directly?
Nothing of significance. We knew there would be some commentary in the general public. We were worried a little bit internally. We have a very mixed workforce, and we pride ourselves in being a very open workforce and open to everybody, all beliefs. Just isn't that kind of place. So we were a little bit worried. We were very careful to explain that this isn't political for us. This is humanitarian. This is starving children. Like, it's nothing beyond that. And I think internally everybody was behind it. So even people who maybe traditionally wouldn't have supported that kind of campaign, once they've fully understood this is entirely on humanitarian grounds, this is where the money's going, they were in full support of it. I have nothing overly specific except the stupid commentary and some of the online things that were pointed out to us, and people talk. But again, this is the good thing with keyboard warriors. They come in all shapes and fighting in all corners. For nearly every negative comment, there was 10 replies from people going back, because there was stuff like, what about helping, people locally? Like, there's enough, such and such is enough of a crap hole. Could you not go and give money to that? And people are just saying back, well, so what are you doing? If you go and help them, like very quickly shutting people down, because I don't think there was anything.
Some people had said, maybe one or two of the local papers had used it for a little bit of clickbait, and some of their followers had gone on, and there was somebody sent me one of the links that had 6,000 comments on it, and it was people arguing with keyboard warriors arguing with themselves about all manner of things. And to be honest, you could go down a rabbit hole and start feeling very negative about it, and but we kind of looked at that and thought, you know what, anecdotally, anyone we're talking to directly is speaking very positively about it, and the overwhelming sense around the company is that this is very, very positive. So we kind of parked the few hundred, let's say, comments that you could see among maybe 20,000 in total across all channels, and focused on the positives.
And people potentially saying, they had been shopping with us for years and they'll never shop with us again, and stuff like that. That's unfortunate. It's not a fallout you certainly want from that kind of campaign. But the reality is, and the advice we had got was very much do this in your own name, not do it. It's the right thing to do, but don't do it in Kukoon's name. And I think somewhere we did know that it wouldn't have the same impact, literally in terms of money raised, and it certainly did have a much bigger impact doing it through Kukoon. People wanted an outlet. People were delighted to be able to give money through something that they needed, rather than
just in terms of Kukoon, it put its money into that. So what did you put in Kukoon money into this?
Yeah, well, we in both cases, say in terms of the Oxfam appeal, we nominated a date. I think it was Friday the 8th of August, and we said every pound sold today will be sent directly to Oxfam. So we shipped. I think it was about 178,000 pound of sales that day. We shipped all the products. We bought the product, obviously shipped the product, paid the marketing fees that day, and paid the VAT, and all the money just went directly to Oxfam. So yeah, I don't know total net cost to the company. It's north of 150,000 without doubt, but that's part of
And I think what's interesting about that, and you've set forth the risks and how it all played out, but ultimately you're in business, and people who are in business, can make decisions like that if it's something they feel strongly about. You weren't doing it to win business. You certainly weren't doing it to lose business, but you were doing it for that humanitarian cause, and it worked.
I think somebody said something to us in those sort of weeks before it about we are all at some point in the future going to have to talk about what we done at this point in time, not just about Gaza, about other things too, but certainly Gaza feels like one of them moments where we have 8 small kids between the two of us, and I think the two of us were like, do we really want in 10 or 15 years when they learn about this in school to be like, yeah, it was awful. Anyway, here's dinner. We wanted to be able to say we done what we could do at that time, and we'll face the consequences for it, but no, it's no regrets whatsoever about it.
Well, listen, thanks both very much. Thanks a million for the masterclass in how to run a retail business, how to run an online business, how to run a family business. Look forward to catching up with you. But 20 years gone, let's catch up in 20 years, sure, and see where we're all at that point. Paul, Claire, thanks a million.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.